Hi, my name is Melissa Gragg with valuationmediation.com. I have been providing valuation and financial services to couples getting divorced for over 20 years. There is a lot of information that I think people are looking for when they're even trying to figure out if they're going to get divorced. So, I wanted to give some information regarding mediation and how it is a possibility, and maybe how we look at mediation a little differently. So, let's start with the basics. What is mediation? Mediation is when you, as a couple, specifically divorce mediation, is when you, as the couple, will come together with a third party neutral. So, what does that mean? Well, typically the mediator is going to be either a financial professional, an attorney, a judge, could be a mental health professional. But basically, it's somebody that understands the process of divorce, understands what couples have gone through, and understands some of the financial aspects, including parenting or maintenance or child support, and can help guide the couple in deciding what is the best way for them to get divorced, right? And so, what mediation is the couple's bringing all of the issues to the mediator, and the mediator is acting as a referee or a communication specialist, if you will, and helping the parties talk about the issues in a very respectful way. A lot of times in divorces, communication issues are a big problem. Maybe it's very difficult to have a conversation with your spouse. Sometimes we have one spouse is a little bit more controlling and the other spouse is a little bit more passive. And so, what happens in mediation is everybody becomes aware of the information, the underlying financial situation, maybe even, the child custody situation. And the mediator will offer ideas or really help you, the couple, come up with ideas that could fit in your situation. So there's really no right or wrong way to go about mediation. It's finding somebody who has a good fit with the couple and understands the divorce arena in your state. Okay, so everything regarding divorce is typically state specific. So finding a mediator that understands what's happening in your state is very imperative. So, how is our process different than mediation? In valuationmediation.com, what we're really looking at is more complex financial matters. And so, what we do a little different is the mediator here is going to be a financial expert, a financial professional that understands how to look at tax returns, how to look at financial statements, bank statements, retirement accounts, understand, maintenance or alimony and child support issues in your specific state. But also, we look at it a little different in that we're sitting in the middle, but providing you some basis of understanding if there is a valuation or a business involved in the particular divorce. So, our process uses a mediator in the middle that is a financial expert. And then we encourage the couple to each get their own attorney and an advocate for them in the process. Um, but for the most part, we just have a little bit different skills in looking at the mediation, is basically from a financial standpoint. So that gets us to kind of another concept called what is a financial neutral? So, a financial neutral is a term that's used in collaborative divorce, or some people may start calling it cooperative divorce. That's a very specific process that's kind of based on mediation, but it involves a little bit more. So, a financial neutral is typically going to sit in the middle and offer both the couples are both spouses information about the financials. So let's say, for example, there's a pension, and we're not exactly sure what the payment's going to be for the pension or how it's going to affect, or if there's a present value, a current value for the pension. So the financial neutral is going to run the analysis and look at different options or analyses and offer it back up to the couple. What would happen if maybe you split the pension? What would happen if one person kept the pension and the other one didn't? The same will affect for evaluation or any sort of stock options or complex financial situation within the divorce. The financial neutral is really working for both parties. And what that means is we're really an advocate for the truth and the information and making sure that everybody has equal footing in understanding what the financial reality is. Okay. So a lot of times it's not for us to be on one side or the other. We're just trying to be an advocate for the information and making sure that everybody understands what information is included, and if there, usually in a divorce, there are some financial nuances in your state. So, one issue is like separate and marital property. So, sometimes a person could have come into the relationship with an inheritance or some sort of gift during the marriage or an inheritance that came in the middle of the marriage. So, the financial neutral would talk to the couple about the differences between separate and marital assets. How do we trace those marital assets? How do we determine what is separate? And gives the parties sort of the good and bad. You're giving both sides of the picture, not just one. And you're uncovering all of the issues that maybe nobody really knows existed. But in our opinion, if you bring all of the information to light for both parties to look at, it gives everybody the opportunity and the capability to make the best decision for themselves and for the couple and for the family unit going forward. So, how is a financial neutral different than an attorney mediator? So, a lot of times we're seeing mediators are attorneys or former judges, and this is because they understand what's happened in divorce litigation. They understood what happened in court, basically. And so, what we are also seeing is that another piece of the divorce process is understanding the financial picture. And a lot of times, the attorneys and judges will absolutely know the legal issues, but may not always be aware of all the financial issues. So, when you're working with a mediator that has a financial background, what we're doing is kind of giving you all the different perspectives about the financial situation. And a lot of times, if there is a business involved, or if somebody is an entrepreneur and they have multiple businesses that they invest in, there's some unknown about what they're worth. And there's some unknown around the cash flow to those businesses or to the couple or to the individuals. And so a financial neutral is going to be a little bit different, and they're going to understand those nuances a lot more. And their goal is to communicate and to tell you and explain to both people all of the nuances of those issues. Now, what does this do? It protects both parties. And how does that do that? Well, I'm basically coming in and saying, I know this issue, um, you know, that you received an inheritance in the middle of the marriage, and there's some portion of it that's separate, but you don't have any good information to really say that it was separate. So what I'm doing is I'm just explaining, like, here's the good and the bad of the situation. So, what would the court do, or what would you have the capability of doing outside of court? Sometimes this is better determined and discussed with a financial person, and then bring in the attorneys to understand the legal concepts. So, what's the first step to work with a mediator? First, I think look around in your area and see if there are any recommended mediators. A lot of times, there are a handful of people that have been doing this work consistently over time and have a good idea of how to facilitate a settlement or negotiation. One thing to understand about mediation is that it's really, you're not bound by it. Okay. So, what does that mean? That means when you start working with somebody, you and your spouse are just agreeing to discuss these situations, right? These issues. You're not agreeing that you will stick to any one position or that this is set in stone. So if you're going to work with a mediator, understand what their background is. Do you have a complex financial situation? Do you have multiple businesses? That might be a great situation for a financial neutral or a financial expert to get involved as a mediator. If you have basically a lot of legal issues, maybe some parenting issues, and then your traditional, two cars, a house, kids, and expenses dealing with that, you might be able to work with any mediator that understands the process and the legalities in your state. But typically, asking some attorneys, there's a tremendous amount of attorneys and financial professionals who are moving into mediation for various reasons, mostly because you have more control over it as the spouses, but also because there are things that we can do outside of court that the court won't allow. For example, in the state of Missouri, if you're going to be paying alimony or maintenance, which is what we also call it, if you go to court, the court is going to issue that alimony forever. If you settle it outside of court, then you could determine that you will pay alimony for 5 years or some alternate date. But that cannot be determined currently in the state of Missouri. So that would be a benefit to working with a mediator. But the mediator could tell you some other benefits specifically in your state. And I would reach out to also somebody that you connect with, right? Do they explain the financial things well? Do they explain the legal aspects well? Does it make sense? And you also need somebody that's going to protect both of you. Okay. So you really want somebody that's going to be neutral in the middle, understand and see both of your positions and both of your sides, but also to give you very salient information that will help you guys settle your situation. So, does a couple have the same mediator? Typically, there is one mediator. Okay. And what happens is the mediator gets involved and they will either work together with you or communicate with you separately if there are other issues such as domestic violence or other reasons where you and your spouse may not want to be in the same room or even on the same Zoom. But typically you will have one mediator that goes between both of you to try to communicate. And then you may or may not each hire your own attorney. So what happens is typically attorneys can only work for one side. So they're hired by one party, not by both parties. And that could be different state to state, but you'll have to obviously check with that. Does the couple have to have the same mediator? Yes. Do they have to have the same attorney? Typically, they will not have the same attorney. Can one party hire an attorney and the other one not? Certainly, that's an option as well. But the mediator, again, you're not bound by what the mediator says. The mediator is not going to come in and tell you what to do. They're really there to encourage you and your spouse to come up with a plan that is reasonable in the eyes of the court and is reasonable in the eyes of your family. So, how do lawyers get involved in mediation? So, when a couple comes to us and says, we have a valuation, we have a business, we have a complex financial situation, I need you as a mediator. When do the lawyers come in? Well, a lot of times we do all of the financial analyses. So, we'll come up with your personal balance sheet, your income and expenses, put together all of your assets and debts. And then we look at one party, typically the non-moneyed spouse or the out spouse, would hire an attorney. And what that means is it's usually the spouse that's not going to continue to keep the business or the wage earner. the non-wage earner spouse. Sometimes we have a spouse that stays at home. And so what we encourage is the spouse that is the least financially savvy is the one that hires an attorney initially. And that attorney will also help that like less sophisticated spouse understand all of the situation, understand all of the decisions that they're making, and make sure that they have somebody as an advocate. And so when we talk about this, lawyers are the advocate. Lawyers are coming in and being your cheerleader. They're saying, we really need to look at it this way, right? But the mediator is going to say, oh, no, we're in the middle. Let's look at both sides. So that when the lawyer gets involved, they're really kind of coming in and saying, well, I want a little bit more for my client or a little bit less for that client. But really, they're just in to make sure that you've thought everything through. So a lot of times, if you've thought everything through, if you had all the available information, the financial data, bank statements, tax returns, all of that you can look through. What happens in the mediation is your attorney may also help you look through documents if you have some concern about the cash, if you have some concern about a spouse doing something with the money. That's when lawyers get involved. But sometimes they are on the outside of the mediation, and sometimes they actually participate in the mediation. So when we facilitate mediations, we will typically have both clients with their attorneys if they are hired. And we can do the mediation or this kind of alternative mediation, even when the parties are in litigation, because really the mediation is just communication, negotiation, and having all of the documents available for everyone to review. So what are the documents that you need for mediation? Typically, some of the documents that you can start with are going to be your historical tax returns. So your tax returns for usually like your personal tax returns, your 1040 for the past 3 to 5 years, that's going to give somebody a really good, adequate view of what your um, income has been for both parties, other documents, other bank accounts, dividends, interest, holdings in farmland or equipment, holdings in businesses and partnerships. And so we'll start with that personal tax return for the last 3 to 5 years. If you have a business, we're going to look at the business tax returns for the last 3 to 5 years. We're going to look at current bank statements. We're going to look at current brokerage statements and securities. Basically, you will need a statement for every account that you own. That means debt, credit cards, mortgage, even getting the VIN numbers and the bank accounts for the house, and any sort of debt on there is going to be helpful. So you're collecting all the data that basically give your financial picture. And then you're talking through some of the nuances of your situation, the kids, the financial situation, the housing situation. Not always does everyone live together at the point that they decide to get divorced. And so you would each be pulling the accounts that you have access to. Those would be the beginning documents, because the first step is to kind of create this personal balance sheet. And so you're putting on all the things that you have, like a house, but you're also adding in the negative, which is the debt or the mortgage on the house. And you're trying to see, like, what do you have left over and how are you going to split this between the two people? So what happens in a mediation meeting? So you've gathered all your documents, you've hired somebody to be your mediator, and you have that first meeting, right? Well, I will tell you what happens in a mediation meeting really depends on the mediator, and everybody has their own style and their own sense of process. But what happens in a mediation meeting with us is that we're going to start to talk through all the assets, talk through the house, talk through the cars, and we're going to have a list of everything that's owned. If we're dealing with a business valuation, there's an entire process that we go through for just the valuation. And it's a similar process in most clients. We're taking the information, we're reviewing the historical results, we're asking questions, and we're asking questions about the business or the financial situation with both people in the room or on a Zoom. A lot of this is being conducted online via Zoom. And so we're getting the mediator an understanding of what the true financial picture is. Another piece that's pretty important in this process is understanding your income and expenses. So, a lot of times we'll say, download the past 12 months of activity in your bank account. And that's usually readily available online. Or get the past 12 to 24 months of bank statements and upload those. And what we're looking at is what's going to happen after this divorce. What's your expenses? What is your income going to be as separate individuals having separate households? Okay. And that's going to be a discussion through it. But we're initially just trying to understand what are the big issues. A lot of times the couple has a tremendous amount of questions, like what happens to this? What happens to the kids for college? Who's going to pay this amount? How do we agree to this? And so a lot of times those first meetings are just talking through the specifics of your case, understanding what your concerns are, major concerns. Where do you agree already? A lot of times you might already agree on certain areas. And then where do you disagree? Typically the disagreements are going to be in areas that you may not totally understand what happens in a divorce. So the mediator's role is to give you a lot of that information and to ask those questions. Eventually you'll start to go through kind of agreeing, who wants the house. And a lot of times we're saying, okay, if both of you want the house, what are the options? If none of you wants the house, what are the options? And we're talking through, is that an understandable option? For example, if you're getting divorced in a January, February, and maybe selling a house at that time isn't a great idea because the kids have to stay in a certain school district until the school year ends. Sometimes there's houses that are kept until the kids go to college. And then there's an agreement of what happens with the house at that date. Okay. So there's a lot of ways in mediation that you can come up with an option that maybe a judge wouldn't determine. But when you guys talk it through, it makes sense for your family. So, how long does mediation take? That's kind of the golden question. I will tell you that depending upon how difficult your case is, how complex is the financial situation, how complex is your assets? Sometimes there are houses and cars, but there's not a lot of cash flow. So the mediation is going to take as long as it needs to take. And that unfortunately is not the answer that everybody wants. But the reality is, how do you communicate, right? Do you have difficulties communicating? Are there difficulties in understanding the financial picture? Is somebody mistrusted? Is there somebody that maybe did some things that lost the trust in that relationship? Well, all of those factors kind of come into play. So most of the time when we see a mediation take less time, it's because both sides have been very open with disclosing and sharing the information. And so they're giving all the documents. Everybody is putting all the cards on the table and kind of just talking through like what makes sense. A mediation could take, 8 hours. It could take 2 hours. It could take multiple months, multiple days. Typically, when we're getting involved in valuations, the valuation alone is going to take 4 to 8 weeks in order to just get that number. And then we start negotiating all of the assets based on knowing all of the numbers. So a mediation is going to take as long as is necessary. Another thing to kind of keep in mind is typically I will see when people are getting divorced, there may be one person that's very gung ho and ready to go, and there may be another person that's not quite there yet. So, having the process take place over time, maybe over a 1 to 3 month period, um, maybe 6 months. Very difficult cases could take a year, but traditionally, probably somewhere in the 3 to 6 month range is very reasonable for you to get through all the documents, to upload and to update the situation, and then to get to a process of hiring attorneys and going forth in order to file it into the court system. A lot of times, even to file something in the court system, you might have a 30 plus waiting period. It's called a cooling off period that you have to wait until you can do anything in the case. And so we kind of walk you through that process. And, sometimes you can negotiate some things on your own. So anything that you can facilitate outside of the mediation is obviously going to help the process as well. So, how much does mediation cost? Um, It really depends again on the mediator. So some mediators could cost as low as $150. Other mediators could be as high as $350 to $450. It really depends on, again, the complexity of your case. If you have a very simple case, you might be able to find a mediator that will do it for a fixed fee. Maybe you could get the entire thing done for $1,000 to $5,000. The situation, though, if you have complexity, is that it could cost more. The time, the amount of time it takes, a lot of this is billed by the hour. So a larger mediation could cost more. Typically, if you go to litigation and you have a complex financial matter, you could end up paying in fees for your attorneys and experts in excess of $100,000. For even a small divorce, you might end up paying 25,000. So going to litigation is a very expensive endeavor. In mediation, it might cost significantly less. But those are conversations to have with your mediator up front. Either they're going to charge you by the hour or they're going to charge you maybe a fixed fee for a group of hours. And you go in stages. A lot of times we get people started with maybe 10 hours and we say, okay, we're going to do some work and we're going to meet with you and let's see where we are at 10 hours. And then let's stop and see what we need to do from there. So you're going to find a mediator that's right for you and the cost is right, but you may need to talk to other people or get referrals and interview them. Ask them what they have done and what kind of experience they have. Everybody is different. Most of the time, a mediator only has to do 40 hours of training and then they develop their own skills and kind of process. And so ask them up front what the costs are going to be. If they can't give you a good range, maybe they haven't done it for very long, or they just don't know what to expect. So if that's uncomfortable for you, have that conversation for sure up front before you hire somebody. So that gives us really a quick conversation about how to get involved in divorce mediation. If you have more questions, or maybe you want to watch other videos about how we incorporate valuations into the mediation, you can reach us at valuationmediation.com with all of our contact information, or feel free to call or email me if you have any additional questions. Thanks so much.